Have you ever noticed how some people seem to disappear from the social world without making any announcement? No arguments, no dramatic fallout, no public declaration that they're done with people. They simply become harder to reach. Messages take longer to answer. Invitations quietly decline. Group chats go unread. And eventually it begins to look like they've chosen isolation. Most people assume they know the reason. Maybe they're antisocial, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're bitter, maybe they just don't like people. But psychology suggests something far more complicated. Because many people who spend large portions of their lives alone aren't running away from human connection. They're running toward emotional safety, and those are not the same thing. The common assumption is that humans are naturally social creatures who feel their best around others. At a broad level, that's true. Connection matters, belonging matters, relationships matter. But what often gets ignored is that not all social experiences feel equally safe to the nervous system. For some people, being alone feels calm. Being around others feels unpredictable. Every conversation becomes a calculation. Every interaction requires monitoring. What should I say? Did that sound stupid? Did they misunderstand me? Do they actually like me? Will this become another disappointment? Most of this happens automatically, below conscious awareness. The brain isn't trying to ruin the experience. It's trying to prevent pain. Psychologists often describe the brain as a prediction machine. Its primary job isn't happiness. Its primary job is protection, and protection depends heavily on memory. Every significant emotional experience leaves a trace, especially painful ones: rejection, humiliation, criticism, betrayal. Abandonment. The brain catalogs these moments carefully, not because it wants you to suffer, because it wants to help you avoid similar situations in the future. The problem is that the brain often learns broad lessons from specific events. One friendship ends badly, and suddenly vulnerability feels dangerous. One relationship causes immense pain, and emotional closeness starts feeling risky. A few experiences of judgment can convince the mind that being fully seen is unsafe. Over time, withdrawal begins to feel rational. Not because people are weak, because their nervous system believes it's being intelligent. And here's where things become interesting. Many people who avoid others don't actually dislike connection. They spend a surprising amount of time thinking about it, wanting it, missing it, imagining it. What they fear isn't people, it's uncertainty. Connection requires exposure. You reveal things about yourself. You become emotionally visible. And visibility creates risk. The possibility of misunderstanding, the possibility of rejection, the possibility of disappointment. Being alone removes those variables. There's a certain predictability to solitude, a certain control. No hidden motives, no social politics, no emotional surprises. The environment becomes easier to manage. And once someone experiences enough relief from that predictability, a powerful association forms. Alone equals safe, not necessarily happy, safe. There's a difference. Safety reduces stress, but safety alone doesn't create fulfillment, which is why many people become trapped in a strange psychological loop. The more they avoid discomfort, the safer they feel. The safer they feel, the harder it becomes to return. Weeks become months, months become years. The social world starts looking increasingly distant, not because they stopped caring, because the gap became intimidating, and yet something important remains true. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. The same brain that learns avoidance can learn trust. The same nervous system that associates people with danger can gradually learn that connection and safety can coexist. But that process begins with understanding. Understanding that avoiding everyone isn't always a sign of hatred, arrogance, or indifference. Sometimes it's a protective strategy that outlived its usefulness. A solution that quietly became a limitation. And once a person recognizes that difference, something shifts. Because what feels like a personality trait may actually be a learned response. And learned responses can change. Which brings us to a deeper question. If solitude feels safe, why do so many people eventually find themselves wanting more than safety alone? The answer begins with a misunderstanding most people carry about solitude. We often treat being alone and being disconnected as if they're the same thing. They're not. One is a physical state. The other is an emotional one. You can spend an entire weekend alone and feel completely at peace. You can also sit in a room full of people and feel profoundly disconnected. Psychology has been pointing toward this distinction for decades. What human beings ultimately need isn't constant social contact. It's meaningful connection, and those are very different experiences. For people who avoid others, this realization often arrives slowly. At first, solitude feels like freedom. No expectations, no obligations, no emotional turbulence. Life becomes quieter, simpler. More predictable, the nervous system finally gets a chance to relax, and for a while that relief feels wonderful, but eventually something unusual starts happening. The absence of conflict also becomes the absence of surprise. The absence of judgment becomes the absence of encouragement. The absence of disappointment becomes the absence of intimacy. Life becomes safer, but also smaller, not immediately, gradually, almost invisibly. The human brain evolved in connection with other people, not because we're incapable alone. Because other people act as mirrors, they reveal parts of us we can't easily see ourselves, our strengths, our blind spots, our fears, our potential. Without realizing it, relationships often become environments for growth. Not comfortable growth, necessary growth, and that's what makes avoidance so deceptive. It solves one problem while quietly creating another. The person who avoids everyone may successfully avoid rejection, but they also avoid acceptance. They avoid misunderstanding. But they also avoid being understood. They avoid vulnerability, but they also avoid genuine closeness. The brain focuses on the dangers being prevented, rarely on the opportunities being lost. This is why many people eventually reach a turning point, not because they're suddenly lonely, because they realize something important. Safety and fulfillment are not the same thing. A ship is safest in the harbor, but it wasn't built to stay there forever. The same principle applies psychologically. Growth requires uncertainty. Every meaningful relationship contains uncertainty. You never fully control how another person thinks, feels, responds, or behaves, and strangely enough, that's part of what makes connection valuable. The very thing that makes relationships risky is also what makes them real. No algorithm can replace that. No routine can replicate it. No amount of self-sufficiency can fully substitute for it. Because human beings aren't designed merely to survive. They're designed to participate, to share experiences, to exchange perspectives, to influence and be influenced. To discover themselves through interaction. The people who avoid everyone often possess qualities that are rarely discussed. They tend to be observant, reflective, self-aware, emotionally sensitive. Many have spent years analyzing situations that others barely notice, which means the issue is rarely a lack of depth. Sometimes it's the opposite. They've seen enough complexity to become cautious. Enough disappointment to become selective. Enough unpredictability to become protective. And while those instincts are understandable, they can slowly convince a person that isolation is the only reliable option. It isn't. The challenge isn't learning how to be around everyone. The challenge is learning how to be around the right people. That's an entirely different goal. Psychological well-being doesn't come from maximizing social contact. It comes from finding environments where authenticity feels safe, where conversation doesn't feel like performance, where acceptance isn't conditional, where your presence doesn't require constant explanation, and those places do exist. The difficulty is that finding them often requires taking small risks, reaching out first, accepting an invitation, starting a conversation, allowing yourself to be seen, not all at once, gradually, one step at a time, because trust rarely returns through insight alone, it returns through experience. Through evidence, through moments that teach the nervous system something new, moments where vulnerability doesn't lead to rejection, moments where honesty doesn't create distance, moments where connection feels easier than expected. Those experiences matter. They begin rewriting old assumptions. The brain starts updating its predictions. People stop looking like threats and start looking like possibilities, not perfect possibilities. Human beings will always disappoint each other occasionally, misunderstand each other occasionally, frustrate each other occasionally. That's part of every relationship. The goal was never perfect safety. The goal was meaningful participation, a life large enough to contain both comfort and connection, both solitude and belonging, both independence and intimacy. And perhaps that's the realization many people eventually reach. Avoiding everyone was never the destination. It was a temporary shelter, a place to recover, a place to think, a place to heal. But shelters are not where life is meant to stay forever. At some point, the door has to open again, not because the world suddenly became safe, but because you've become strong enough to engage with it differently. The psychology of people who avoid everyone isn't really about hating people. It's often about protecting something fragile. Protecting trust, protecting hope, protecting the parts of themselves that were hurt before. The tragedy is that those same parts often need connection to fully heal. And maybe that's why the people who spend years avoiding others still find themselves thinking about friendship, thinking about relationships, thinking about belonging. Because somewhere beneath the protection, the desire never actually disappeared. It was simply waiting for a reason to come back. And now I'm curious, have you ever pulled away from people because it felt safer? And if so, what would need to happen for connection to feel worth the risk again?